It's the Low Tox Life podcast, and I am Alex Stewart, your host.
No matter how perfect is their diet and exercise, they're still unhappy, so they obsess more over their diet and exercise. So the bottom line is, when you're unhappy, if someone says, oh, well, you're unhappy, you should do yoga. But if you don't like yoga, then that doesn't make you happy. So do something that makes you happy.
Today, I have something that just may unlock the very thing you've been looking for. Professor Loretta Breuning. She is a professor emerita. She's written over 10 books, translated into 16 languages. She founded the Inner Mammal Institute. All of this has happened because as a teacher and a mum, she was super frustrated with the way we were teaching and explaining human motivation. And once she studied the animal kingdom, it all made sense. Now, you will know if you tune into the show on a regular basis, we have incredible low tox business partners here on the podcast. They help you with your low tox swaps or stock ups, depending on where you're at in your low tox journey. And today I have two offers for you, both for the Australians, but always check because sometimes it's international. I have ozclimate.com.au with 10% off, code LowToxLife, dehumidifiers, air purifier, cooling, air heating solutions. And just a pro tip, sometimes they're on sale and your 10% works on top of that. Now, you also have a very special Australian-owned and made brand, Pure Earth, again, .com.au, and 20% off site-wide. They're beautiful hair, body and face care products. It excludes, obviously, packs that are already put together at special prices, but your code LowToxLife will give you 20% off everything else. Now, let's hook into this show. I cannot wait to hear what you think of Loretta and her work. Enjoy. Hello, Loretta. I am so excited for this conversation. And can I say off the bat, as I've dived into your books and read more about you and started to follow you on Instagram, you would have just been the best professor to have in uni. I could just imagine your students adoring you. Where did your curious mind get lit up and why the study of animals and how they pertain to us? Like, how did that kind of unfold for you?
Well, when I was young, I was surrounded by a lot of unhappiness. And the reason was not obvious. A lot of kids, we absorb the unhappiness around us from mirror neurons. But kids have different theories about what the problem is and maybe gravitate toward whatever they're told. But in my case, it was sort of a secret, like I didn't know what the problem was. So I think that's why I was always trying to figure out, what is everybody so upset about? And when I left home, I got very interested in academic psychology, and I thought it had the answer. And if I just followed the book, did everything by the book of social science, then everything would be good. But after having thousands of students and having children who became teenagers, started seeing a lot of young people without motivation. And I felt that academic psychology was not explaining this the way it had been taught to me. So I read more and more, and I stumbled on monkey studies that mention the dopamine in monkeys, the serotonin in monkeys, the oxytocin in monkeys, and it was never connected. It was just one little mention. And so I took early retirement and I focused on that.
Wow. And boy, have you focused on that. So there are so many questions I have, but I guess the first is, do you feel like the main concern that developed for you was, why are we studying the monkeys over there and not as it relates to our own lived experience and what we can learn from them as humans rather than learn about monkeys?
No, the problem was that all of that monkey work had been done like in the 70s up to the 90s, and then it disappeared. It became taboo. And now the current theory in academic psychology is that monkeys are altruistic and nurturing and cooperative, and humans are bad because of capitalism. And so we have to just go back to nature and then we'll all be cooperative and nice. But the fact is that animals will kill each other over a banana. That's what I learned, you know?
Yeah, well, the competitive piece is really integral to your research and what you want us to all know. And I think we often feel like competition is nasty, it's bad, I shouldn't want to be competitive. Unpack it for us.
Sure. Well, you said we talked about like the competitiveness over a banana, but when it comes to mating opportunity, this is what's really motivating in the animal world. So, in the human world, this is why people obsess over their appearance. It's why people obsess over their children's exam scores because the brain evolved to reward what's biologists call reproductive success. And reproductive success means anything that promotes the survival of your genes. And of course, animals are not aware of genes. They just do what feels good. But natural selection builds a brain that makes you feel good when it helps you promote your genes. And in the animal world, when you rise in the social hierarchy, you get more mating opportunity. So natural selection built a brain that motivates you to rise in the social hierarchy. See how relevant that is to the sort of dating psychology, let's call it, but nobody wants to admit that.
And so, what happens when we admit it? What happens when we go, you know what? This is actually our hard wiring. Do we then try to override it with therapies and inner work and all of that jazz that we often see talked about on the internet? Or do we find a way to harness the best aspects of that from a motivation and neurotransmitter perspective, like engineer it for good somehow?
I like both of your suggestions, and since it's quite difficult, a person probably needs a combination of both. The problem is the people don't want to admit it because they're so deeply entrenched in this idea that I am born perfect and other people messed up, society messed up, or maybe I have a genetic disorder and then the healthcare system should cure it, and the healthcare system messed up. So it's all externalizing, but in my opinion, it's very disempowering. So the first step is to understand that we're producing these responses ourselves. Then, yes, like as you said, that a big part of it is self-acceptance. So one part of it is rewiring, and we can rewire, but just so we can put our energy in, and it sounds like the Alcoholics Anonymous slogan, focus on the things you can change and accept the things you can't change.
Yeah. And so let's talk about some of the things that we really struggle with, or in the zeitgeist, we're kind of starting to realize how many people are experiencing anxiety and how many people are experiencing loneliness. What can the animal kingdom and the work you've done do to shed some light on how we can start to create a better picture, I think, because it started to feel like, and I think it could be also the big tech content landscape, the avalanche of information day after day from media, from science, and you feel like it's almost out of control, and it's very easy to become disempowered and think, well, I don't know where this is all going to lead, but I guess we are all getting more anxious. Like, I still have hope that we can actually slow things down enough to do the work we need to do to change the picture, though.
Well, in my opinion, the zeitgeist is very alarmist. So they have to compete for your attention by having a new crisis every few years.
100%. Well, every day it's much more profitable for them, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, in my opinion, a person can just choose to stop believing in whatever the crisis is. So, what's important is to understand how we produce that sense of crisis internally. So, I'll give you a very simple explanation. First, we're all born crying. And so, being in that exploding with cortisol state is actually our natural default state. So people want to think like joy and ecstasy is our natural default state, but it's not. If you spend any time around babies, you see how maybe you entertain them for a few seconds and then they go back to crying. So it's a real complex skill. This might call it self-soothing. But why is a baby crying? So it's not like a real need, it's not intellectual, but we are born with the ability to feel needs, but no ability to do anything about it. So that's why once your cortisol turns on, like I'm hungry, cortisol turns on, I should go get some food. But a baby can't go get any food. So cortisol, we all know, is what makes an animal run when they smell a predator. Baby can't run, so it's this like feeling of I need to do something fast to make the bad feeling go away. That's the core feeling in us. Now, as you get older and older, you get a little wiser about what is really causing the bad feeling and solving it. Like, ideally, I feel bad because I have a test coming up and I can control that feeling by studying for the test. But we all know that not everybody makes that, rational decision. So let's say I study for a test, I get a bad grade. Cortisol is released. The brain learns from cortisol. It paves a neural pathway. So now the next time I think about a test, I'm flooding myself with cortisol. Now it's harder to study because I'm flooding myself with cortisol. So this is sort of a learned sense of threat. And none of us know that we're doing it. So then when we have the media telling us why we're feeling bad and externalizing it and blaming it on society, so that's it. So that's another whole thing. But let me give you one more layer of all of this. We're all going to die. We all know we're going to die. And kids don't really understand it because they don't really have a sense of the future. But in adolescence, you start understanding that everyone's going to die. And this is a very fearful feeling. And I think it's a big cause of that sort of bitterness of adolescence and that sort of nothing's worth it because we're all going to die, so why bother? So the more we get to be skillful in meeting our own needs and relieving our sense of threat, the more reason we have to feel threatened because we're like sort of closer and closer to the end. And so animals don't consciously know they're going to die. But that's because animals only feel threatened when the predator is right there. But humans can imagine threats. So we're all imagining threats all the time. So it's a real art to redirect your brain. And it's like, well, I am going to die. And I am going to fail to solve some problems. And I am going to lose everyone I love at some point if I live to be 100. Maybe. And so I can focus on something rewarding anyway. That's the skill that we all need to learn.
It's the skill we all need to learn. And it was fascinating. I don't want to brush over what I found really important that you said there as a beginner's mind in this subject, which was adolescents learn that we're all going to die. And that can contribute to the, well, what's it all for then if we're all going to die? Wow, when we look at the statistics on teen mental health, on suicide in boys, especially young men, how do we help more people feel like it's worth it, even through bad things? What have we learned?
So when we want to help other people, we often fail because we can't reach into another person's brain.
Yeah.
And so on some level, we need to accept that. If you're talking about your kids, that's a different story. Let's just start with we need to start with ourselves. That I wrote a separate book about this called The Science of Positivity. Like, I can feel better whether or not other people feel better. So I don't need to fix the world. And if it's for your kids, you're actually better off focusing on feeling better because that's modeling for them, and their mirror neurons will take in that skill of choosing to feel better rather than like, I'm upset because you're upset and I love you so much that I can never be happy for 1 minute. Like, what is that teaching them? So, but because you mentioned young men, let me just put this in historical context. So, birth control did not exist until the early 60s for the most part. And so nobody would let you near their daughter unless you could provide for any children who would come along. And that made sense because, like, you don't want to be forced to be raising these kids, if you have teenagers. That was what motivated young men for most of human history. You had to prove that you could provide before you could have sex. Today, like, you practically have health classes, like, as soon as they're in puberty, like almost encouraging them to have sex. And so this is like If you go to a dog training class and you give the dog the treat without them doing the trick, the dog will never learn the trick.
Okay. And so is the idea that we actually need to build a work for it to get it mentality real early? The effort piece actually really, really matters more than we've been talking about it mattering, like Carol Weck's work.
Yeah. So when you say we, I don't know if you're referring to yourself
More
or
as a
to your child.
collective, as a
Yeah,
as
yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. A society, yes, absolutely. A society needs to build you need to do the step before you get the treat. And a lot of people are against that, especially the teacher education system is against that. I just wrote another book about that, which is,
another book. You've got so many books. It's crazy.
yeah, so that one is called The Jane Goodall of Goats.
Mm,
But the idea is, theorizing about society is almost a drug in a way, you know?
yeah.
So the first thing is, how could I do it for myself? So how can I, because ideally you learn it when you're young, but if you didn't learn it when you're young, then if you just say, well, my life is hopeless because I didn't learn it when I'm young. And first, we have to talk about how our brain really is wired when we're young. Our neuroplasticity peaks before age 8, and then we have another spurt during puberty. After that, it takes a tremendous amount of repetition to learn something new. And so, how do you do that repetition? Again, I learned from animal training. So, if you repeatedly have a dog do a certain behavior and give them a treat, then it soon builds a neural pathway and it becomes automatic. But it takes more repetition than you expect. And the way animal training works is you divide the new task into a very, very small step. And so you get a tiny treat for a tiny step. And then you have the sense of success because you're actually getting the reward.
Okay. I love that because there's so much to counter with the instant gratification piece now, isn't there? You know, you pick this up and you're instantly gratified. You can be entertained or watch your favorite creator bring something new out or, and you get things for nothing. And so,
Well, yeah, okay.
no.
Well,
And
I'm not
so I just kind of
100%.
want to work out,
Yeah.
is it okay sometimes? Is it, is some of it just part of human joy and connection to get things for not having to work for them? And is it actually about just making sure we find a bit of a balance?
So our brain is always looking for a sense of accomplishment. I can explain that in terms of the happy chemicals, but first, I'll do that later. But so first, how do you get a sense of accomplishment? Well, we all try to repeat whatever worked for us when we were young, but we can't always succeed in everything we do.
No.
So then if you fail and then you build a pathway, it's like, oh, I'm not going to try because I'm going to fail. So we look for a way to succeed that we can control. So for some people, the phone has become that. But then you can't control it because if I get 10 likes and I'm happy, and maybe tomorrow I get 12 likes, so then I'm even happier, but the next day I only get 8 likes, and then I feel bad. So it's just the natural human quest to take the next step, to do the next thing. And I wouldn't blame the phone because that disempowers you. And if you didn't have the phone, if you lived on a tropical island, you'd be worried about, how can I get more coconuts? And what if there's a hurricane and I lose all my coconuts?
Wow. So I feel like there's an incredible ability there, well, invitation to just accept that we are naturally wired for all of these things. It's
Yes.
very natural responses we're having here.
Yes. And therefore, we can control the natural responses or not control them. And the way it works in nature is like, let's say if you're a dog who, like, you see another dog has a bone that you want and you attack that dog, but if that dog is bigger than you, there's going to be a very painful consequence. In the modern world, we want to take away all the painful consequences. And so we leave it to each person to build that ability to redirect your brain from the negative to the positive. But if you don't learn it when you're young, then you just spin around in whatever negative behavior you learned when you were young.
And sorry, go for it. Go for it. All good.
Oh, well, many very loving parents, I'm not blaming the parents here because I did this myself. Is like when your child is suffering, the modern theory of parenting is that you need to give them a hug and, give them a treat. And so they may get rewarded for negativity, and that deeply wires them for negativity. And I didn't know any of this when my kids were young, so that's why I feel strongly about it.
And so, if you could go back and be parenting your young children again, play out a scenario that you'd do differently.
Yeah, so the first thing is controlling my own emotions because you can't control the kids' emotions. But when you have that feeling, when your child is crying, that you feel it so deeply and you have to make them stop crying, you know? On the one hand, that's a natural thing. But on the other hand, I personally was raised with a mother who cried all the time. And I lived in a state of fear of my mother crying. And so I know that when my child cried, I overreacted and like having to make it better. So that's one whole piece. And then the other whole piece is to know that frustration is an invitation to build the skill of overcoming frustration. So when a child does something and they get frustrated, and then you want to fix it for them, and then they never learn to build the skill of perseverance. So maybe I would be less helpful.
Less helpful. Wow. I love these lessons. So good. Can we talk about, you talked about the dogs with the bone there, and it made me think of a post I was seeing of yours that is yet another book I now want to dive into yours about, where you explore the power of hunger in the natural world and how hunger has kind of been taken away from us humans. What do we need to understand better about hunger as a driver, a positive driver for planning, preparation, future thinking? Because I think when we then think back to what's it all for? Hunger at least gave us in the animal world a constant, well, it's for my next damn meal, or it's for preparing for the winter. And we don't have that anymore.
Exactly. So first, that was a perfect summary. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
So, when you are struggling to meet your survival needs, then our ancestors, for millions of years, they worked hard to meet their survival needs. If they found a tree full of ripe fruit, they were really happy, and they didn't have a lot of time left for philosophical happiness because pretty soon the tree had no more fruit and they had to find another fruit tree. Today our physical needs are met so easily that we don't get that dopamine stimulation from those steps toward meeting our needs. And the popular view makes it even harder because they say you shouldn't focus on mere survival. You shouldn't be thinking about survival. And they say, oh, so many people are just in survival mode. But actually, those people who are in survival mode are not on the internet complaining. No. So survival mode is what our brain was designed for. And the best example I could give you is if you were on a cruise ship and you have nothing to do but eat all day,
Yeah.
and like all you could do is think about the next meal. It's not great.
So if we think about someone who's going through something really tough, then, or I think about like our food deserts where, you have to drive across 3 highways to get to a supermarket. But if you're in 3rd generation poverty, you don't got a car. So like so constantly in a state of tension, but going into a place where you also feel like, why is it so hard for me when it's not as hard for those people? Why is everybody blaming me? Like we tend to other low socioeconomic classes or immigrants or, the people who really are struggling a lot more than the people who are complaining about them being the cause of their problems. I'm not trying to turn it into something political, but I just want to unpack this idea of survival a little bit more. It almost feels like my brain is trying to get me to a place where I say, is the reason people who have it easy complain about the people who are like schlepping off the system or whatever you want to call it, entitled or getting payments from governments and things like that, have we developed an inflated sense of our own efforts if we're complaining about other people being our problem? I don't even know if I'm unpacking this right. It's definitely not PhD level thinking, Loretta.
Well, actually, it is PhD level thinking because this is what academic psychology is teaching today. I did not learn any of this from academic psychology. They do not teach what I'm saying. They do not prove at all of what I'm saying. I took early retirement from a different field to say this.
Yeah, okay.
So I feel like there's a few different aspects of what you're saying. So first, it is political in the sense that you are having political beliefs, and the same political beliefs are infused in academic psychology. And one part of this is so focused on good guys and bad guys. And there are all these bad thinking people out there who think the wrong way and somehow blaming our unhappiness on those bad guys. But when I left the academic world, I just let go of that belief. So let me use a different idea. Social comparison is a natural animal impulse. So animals are always comparing themselves to others because if you take a banana from a monkey who's stronger than you, they're going to bite you. But if you never take a banana, then you're going to starve to death. So they're constantly making social comparisons and looking for the opportunity of where can they find their niche, where they have enough strength to meet their needs. And when they have that moment of like, I'm the man, that's a little bit of serotonin. That's a release of serotonin. So we're constantly looking for that feeling of I'm strong enough to meet my survival needs. And how we decide that is wired in when we're young by how our parents think about it, how our teachers think about it, and what is our actual lived experience. So for example, when I was a kid, when I was 16, I got a job. I earned $1.60 an hour, and I felt like I was rich. And so my family had very little money, but I felt like I was rich. So it's the joy when you take action, when you take steps to meet a need, it stimulates your dopamine. That's what makes you happy. If other people meet your needs for you, and or if you believe that you cannot meet your own needs, that it's hopeless, then you don't stimulate dopamine. So that could happen to a person at any income level. You know, lots of rich people have children who never grow up and take action to meet their needs. Lots of poor people, lots of middle class people. So I think it's not really about income.
Right, okay. And so is there a way that we can meet our needs and get our juicy dopamine without feeling the need to overpower a whole bunch of other people or take things away from other people?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that's challenging. So the first step is to know that my serotonin is not going to be on all the time. Your serotonin is not. Nobody has this serotonin feeling all the time. If I were the biggest gorilla, then other gorillas would constantly be challenging me for my position. So nobody gets that feeling of being in the one-up position all the time. So we can just enjoy that moment when we have that feeling rather than making it a crisis when we don't have it. But that's, unfortunately, people are being raised with this idea that you should feel good every minute. And if you don't feel good every minute, then it's a disorder. So that's one whole aspect of it. And the other whole thing is that having this sense of I'm the man, we can think of it in a small way, such as if I'm playing poker and I need a certain card and I get that card, it's like, oh, I'm excited because I think I'm going to win. So it's important to think of that feeling in a healthy way rather than making it taboo. You know, let's say you lose your keys and then you find your keys. And so rather than thinking, I'm such an idiot, I always lose my keys, I could think, there, I haven't lost my marbles. I can find my keys when I need them. You know, is that inner sense of strength.
And so really starting to recognize all those tiny moments of like little mini accomplishments. Oh, there are my glasses. And it feels good when you find them, or you think you left your phone at home and there it is in your bag, but it was just down the bottom. Like it actually matters to recognize the goodness of those moments. Is that what you're saying? Like, it's actually quite positive to not just gloss over all the tiny little happy moments that we have.
So if you're looking for your glasses and then you find them, that's dopamine. But we were talking about a sense of strength. So the serotonin part of it is your beliefs about your own strength. And
Got
if you
it.
feel like, oh, I'm such a loser, first I lose my glasses, then I lose my keys, I can never get anything done, so I'm not even going to bother trying, then you're never going to stimulate your dopamine, and then you're going to say, oh, it's the world's fault. I'm sorry, you're never going to
Serotonin.
stimulate your.
Yeah, so let's say that again. So if you give it away and you think, I'm never gonna, I suck, then you're never gonna stimulate your serotonin, and then it becomes the world's fault. When we compound the dopamine effect of scrolling and seeing fun, fanciful things on our phone that please us or elicit a big reaction, does that further hijack our ability or sense of will around serotonin chasing and effort? It's all good. If you need a sip of
No,
water, take it.
thank you,
No
thank you.
problems.
So a lot of this is learned when we're young because our neural pathways are built when we're young, when we have a lot of myelin, which is the substance that paves neural pathways. It actually coats neurons, makes them more efficient. So we tend to flow into the neural pathways we built when we were young. So whatever a person built about their own sense of efficacy when they were young. So a person could think, I'm really good at X, but I'm really bad at Y. So it helps to get a little more specific than to go into those early experiences of, oh, I see where I got that idea that I'm bad at X and good at Y. So then you can see,
Like the kindergarten report card or something ridiculous that
yeah,
we layer
well,
on
yeah.
kids.
And then you could see that it's just a neural pathway. And these neural pathways are like a lens where your brain filters the world and you focus on the evidence that fits, the evidence that you're good at this and bad at that. And then you think that that's the real world. And it's not the real world, or although you may have gotten behind in building the skill in one thing, and you may be overemphasizing another thing. So each of us needs to know that we're filtering the world through our old neural pathways, and then to say, well, I can look for new evidence and look at the world in a new way.
Look for new evidence. I love that because we so often tell ourselves things that simply are not true about ourselves.
Yeah, and we can prove it. We always think we can
Oh,
prove it.
yeah. Yeah. We're desperate to prove that we suck. I mean, it's crazy if you think about it. And so, if we've grown up with those layers on top of us, if you like, lack of self worth, and you've found yourself as a grown up and you found yourself listening to this and you're thinking, but how do I even start to build new evidence, or like what is my daily work to actually start changing my own story about myself?
Yeah.
What do we know there?
So the first thing is realistic expectations, because this concept of self-esteem, self-worth has been sort of exaggerated. Like if you say, oh, this person has low self-esteem, but of course, if a person's self-esteem is too high, then we criticize that too. But there's really no perfect. And my evidence for this is like when you listen to celebrity interviews, every single one of them tells you about how insecure they were in high school and how unpopular they were in high school. Every single person you interview feels that way. So the point is, that's the rational position, because we can't control the world. We are like vulnerable, and yet we desire to control the world. So we all end up in this sense of weakness. It is realistic, you know? So then the next thing I think of, I use this concept, I call it being in neutral. So happy brain chemicals tell your brain, go for it now because this is a good opportunity. And threat chemicals tell your brain, run away now. But in between the forward and the back is what I call the neutral gear. Like in a car, it's not going forward, it's not going backward. So when I'm in neutral gear, I'm not prejudging things as good for me or bad for me. I'm taking in new information and I'm saying, I don't know, maybe good, maybe bad. I need to gather more information. And that's sort of what we need to do to gradually see new possibilities.
And yeah, I think I really like the work of John DeMartini in painting that there are goods and bads in literally everything. Everything, no matter how bad or good you perceive the thing to be. And I think there's something incredibly freeing in that, because then there's less attachment and you're actually,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Exactly, exactly. But this automatic sense of getting down on yourself. So, if another thing to know about it, so it's a chemical called cortisol. Once it's released, it lasts in your body for about an hour. So, if something bad happens, like 10 minutes later, you're still feeling bad and you don't even remember that bad thing that happened. I'll give you a simple example. If I get an email that tells me to do this certain task and I click on the link and the link doesn't work, and I'm sort of frustrated, like that sense of frustration, then I'm off to something else. I don't even remember that, but I'm still feeling bad. And that chemical carries with me. And now maybe I talk to my husband and I have a negative preconception that I'm projecting onto him because my threat chemicals are on. So again, it's just important to understand how our brain works.
So good. And can we talk a little bit about happiness to finish? Because you obviously wrote another book on this, The Habits of a Happy Brain. Now, The Habits of a Happy Brain, and the byline is retrain your brain to boost your serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin, and endorphin levels. But we're also in this conversation talking about how we aren't supposed to be happy all the time. So what is a happy brain in your view then?
Sure. Well, I have to tell you that the little blurb on my book, Habits of a Happy Brain, was written by the publisher.
I was gonna say, as an author myself, I'm like, I think that was probably not what Loretta would have chosen as the strap line if she was in charge. No judgment. If the publishers are listening, you're just doing your job. It's all good.
To be honest, I didn't write the title either. So my original title for that book was Meet Your Happy Chemicals, Serotonin, Dopamine, Oxytocin, and Endorphin. So I thought that was much better because, however, I have to say that the publisher sold more than me, so whatever.
Fine.
Originally self-published it under the title Meet Your Happy Chemicals. But I think the important thing is for people to become aware of them. But in my original book, I also explained that whatever turned on your happy chemicals when you were young built big neural pathways that motivate you to turn them on in that particular way today. So a simple example is one person makes other people, is like, they call themselves a pleaser, but that worked when they were young. Another person has maybe an opposite, like an oppositional attitude, like, I'm not going to try to please you. I'm going to try to hurt you because that worked for them when they were young. It protected them against whatever. So we're all wired when we're young. And then we repeat these behaviors and we think they're going to work, but they stop working. Partly they stop working because whatever worked when you were young doesn't necessarily work in the adult world. And another reason they don't work is because of what's called habituation, which is to say that if I walk into a flower shop, like I'm ecstatic with that smell, but like 5 minutes later, I'm like whoever I was, before I walked into the shop. So I can't make my life better just by hiding in a flower shop all the time.
Well, can I ask you a question here? Because you were just talking about cortisol and the bad thing happens and the cortisol's still with you for a whole hour. In the positive experience where you've walked into the flower shop and you've smelled the flowers and provided you're not allergic, you're like, oh, this is amazing. Does our happy chemical stay with us for a little bit longer?
That's
Damn,
the challenge.
I was kind of hoping you weren't going to say that. Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
Shorter. And if you imagine a lion looking at a bunch of gazelles, and the lion is looking for the gazelle it thinks it can catch, because if it just runs after the whole herd, it's going to starve to death. So it looks for like, there's one that's kind of weak and kind of separated. That's the one for me. So that's the happy chemical spurt that releases the energy when you're thinking, that's the one for me. And that's the feeling we want, is like, whoa, that's a good opportunity to meet my needs. That's what we're.
God, my mind went straight to that guy that kind of hovers at the dance floor with the chicks. When you're a young girl and you're like, oh God, no, please don't pick me to kind of come after and chat to. I'm not feeling it, but they might like zone in on someone. And that's literally just animals doing their thing, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Mm.
yeah, yeah.
And so why, when other mammals, like really hold on to tribal life, why do humans want to get out of there so much? Or some of us, like some people find a
Yeah,
lot of safety in the tribe because they're so scared for whatever reason. But some people want to bust out of the tribe as quickly as possible. I am the
yeah,
latter. I am not a tribal person.
yeah, exactly.
Why some, why not?
So here's the thing. This is the book I'm working on now about herd behavior.
Mm,
Again, not what anyone wants to hear. Animals do not stay with the tribe all the time. They are
okay.
constantly making a decision, going with the tribe, like following the crowd when it's good for me, going my own way when it's good for me. And they evolved a brain that has the ability to weigh the evidence. When is it good for me to go with the crowd, and when is it good for me to go my own way?
Wow. So this is why, because I keep thinking, like politically, I keep thinking we shut up about what our side is doing wrong, but we criticize what the opposite side is doing wrong. And while we continue to do that, we perpetuate this lack of actual accountability and progress for our species. I genuinely believe that. But are you saying like it's so hardwired to be that way that that's actually a really tough one to make progress on?
I'm sorry, it's so hard to be which way.
It's hard to actually not be weighing up when it's good for me as our default.
Okay. Yeah, but you have also been trained to believe that it's evil to be what is good for me by psychology professors who are very self-centered and self-interested and will never acknowledge it. But they do not at all live what they're preaching.
That's what I'm thinking. It's so toxic.
This is why I took early retirement from
Mm.
academia as soon as I could. So, an easier way to think about it is that animals run to the herd when they perceive a predator. So they would rather go their own way because when you're too close to the group, you have more competition for food. And to put it simply and crudely, you end up eating grass that has been soiled by another animal, and they get intestinal worms when they do that. So they would rather just spread out. But if they do that, then they're the one that gets picked off by the predator. So when they sense a predator, they not only run to the group, but they push their way to the center where they are safer and leave the weaker ones around the edges. So this is a very selfish behavior, and yet group behavior has been presented to us as this bonding and cooperation and togetherness and belonging. And so we've been given this unrealistic view of what life is like.
Wow. Well, the natural next option here is for us to all devour literally every book you've written, because I think there's just such a peace in knowing
Yeah.
that we don't have to be ashamed of all of these parts of ourselves that we seem to develop protocols and courses and work to do. When actually, what would you say, Loretta, would actually be the best work we could do on ourselves as humans to be a more evolved species, as we all seem to so desperately want to be? What do you think the best work might be for us all in our own lives?
Well, in the interest of time, I'm going to use a very simplistic example, which I would call it have a hobby, okay?
Mm.
Because a hobby is something that you can control. You can't control society, even in your career, in your family, you can't control other people. So, a hobby is something you can control. Now, in the well-being world, people are always focused on diet and exercise. And I live in this world in Northern California where people just obsess over their diet and exercise, and no matter how perfect is their diet and exercise, they're still unhappy, so they obsess more over their diet and exercise. So the bottom line is, when you're unhappy, if someone says, "Oh, well, you're unhappy, you should do yoga," but if you don't like yoga, then that doesn't make you happy. So do
Preach.
something that makes you
Yes.
happy.
Yes, 100%. We spend so much time trying to do things that make other people happy and follow them in their happiness. And we wonder why we're unhappy, ashamed, or feeling a sense of failure or giving up. And
Yes,
it's ridiculous. I talk about this all
yes,
the time. And this is this hyper externalization illness that we have. Like, it's not out there. What do you want to do? I want to
yes,
play piano and tennis. That's
yes,
all I want to
exactly,
do to make me
exactly.
happy. Yeah.
Now, there's a little big problem with this.
Okay.
When you say piano and tennis, it's fabulous to have more than one thing. So that's
Okay.
the bottom line.
Please don't make me choose. Yeah.
No, exactly. Because if you only have one thing, it loses its luster. And a simple way of saying that is, if I have this favorite song and it makes me happy when I listen to it, but if I have that song playing all day, every day, then I'm not going to have any reaction to it after a while. And so I got this example from the book Flow, I think. So I think it was him who said, when that song doesn't make me happy anymore, I could try a new song, but that new song doesn't make me happy either, because there's only this sweet spot in the middle when
Mm.
something is familiar, but not too familiar. So the hobby that becomes too familiar doesn't excite you anymore, but the hobby that's completely unfamiliar doesn't excite you. So you have to experiment with a new hobby all the time so that you'll have it in the sweet spot when the old hobby gets too old.
And so, as someone who has a label of ADHD, who loves exploring new hobbies, I feel wired to discover new exciting things to do all the time. There's actually something excellent about the pursuit of a new hobby constantly on the burn, is what you're saying.
Yeah, yeah. Now, if you do that to the point of not meeting your survival needs,
Mm.
that would be a problem. But obviously, your brain has learned somebody else will meet my survival needs if I don't do it.
Hmm.
So, therefore, I'm free to just experiment with new things, you know?
Yeah.
Or another way of looking at it is like if you think of a teenager who says, if I study for an exam, I'm going to get upset. So I'm not going to study for an exam. I'm going to do something else.
Mm.
So that's really running from pain. So that's like another whole, if a person limits their ability to enjoy new things because they're running from pain.
And that's something we can help, especially with our kids, learn how just put a little bit more effort in. It's the effort that matters. And you'll at least know you gave it your best. That's important, right?
Well, also, when you have this running from pain, to acknowledge that the pain is a real thing, it's caused by a neural pathway that you built in your past that's causing you to make a negative prediction. And if you try something new and you try it for, let's just say 10 times for a kid, if you try the new thing for 10 times, that will build a new pathway, and then you'll have a positive prediction rather than a
Yes.
negative prediction.
What a beautiful place to finish for the parents that are struggling on that issue that's very common. Loretta, I honestly feel like I could go a whole nother hour, maybe a 3-day seminar. I'd love to invite you back for a part 2 at some stage next year. I love your
Great.
work. I feel so happy that I've discovered what you do. It's equally inspiring, and eliciting of a lot of curiosity, I think, in the minds of people who are trying to figure out like the balance here between the work, the inner work, the communal work, and you've just given us so much to think about. So thank you so much for joining me on the show, and good luck with the next book.
Thank you. Thank you. It was fun. I love the questions. Thanks.
Thank you for joining me, and for every comment, review, share, subscribe. It genuinely means the world, and it helps grow the show. I'm so glad you're here.